Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, official delegation representatives, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Rani Ali, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 7th edition of the annual investment meeting. Great efforts have been done to invite you all in Dubai to be part of this momentous event. I would like to thank the ministers, ambassadors, head of international organizations, foreign dignitaries, as well as the distinguished representatives of the private sector, the global FDI experts, our sponsors, supporting partners, the media, and the thousands of participants for being with us at the Annual Investment Meeting 2017, enriching our deliberations and interactions. It is most rewarding to see so many countries from around the globe converging to Dubai to attend this year's 7th edition. With 55 ministers and many delegations from more than 120 countries, honoring the United Arab Emirates with their presence, accompanied by large delegations of government high officials and businessmen. The annual investment meeting is the world-leading FDI platform, organized by the UAE Ministry of Economy under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, UAE Vice President, Prime Minister, and ruler of Dubai. It is the compass that guides investors from all over the world and shows them where it's best to explore investment opportunities based on the latest FDI trends. The annual investment meeting in Dubai connects East and West, serves as a gateway for investors to see the world with a clearer perspective and armed with the investment knowledge they need. Our theme for this year is International Investment Path to Competitiveness and Development, which will discuss how to attract the right kind of international investment that would contribute to the competitiveness of national economies. It will shed light on the special role of foreign firms in enhancing a country's competitiveness. We are very honored in the 7th edition of the annual investment meeting to have Abu Dhabi government as our host city partner. Their support reflects the position of the Abu Dhabi government aimed at strengthening efforts of the relevant government agencies to attract foreign direct investment to the Emirate. And now, let's watch a short video.
مؤخراً انتهينا من تصنيع أجزاء أساسية لهياكل الطائرات وأصبحت تركب في خطوط طيران الاتحاد، وبذلك أصبحنا المورد الأساسي والوحيد في الشرق الأوسط اللي يقوم بهذا العمل. فخورة وسعيدة لما شاهد طائرة تطير في السماء ربما تكون تحمل أجزاء صنعت بأيدي إماراتية.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
نستعد للجولة في المحطة.
أكيد.
تفضل معك. حاليا تشهد دولة الإمارات وخاصة المنطقة الغربية تحول كبير في مجال إنتاج الطاقة، ولا شك أن وفرة الطاقة الشمسية اللي تتميز فيها المنطقة تعطينا الفرصة أن نحن ندمج مصادر الطاقة المتجددة إلى منظومة إنتاج الكهرباء في الإمارات، بالإضافة إلى إيجاد حلول عملية وتكنولوجية ليس فقط للإمارات ولكن للعالم أجمع.
I think not only the culture but the people here are very welcoming, and I've definitely seen a lot of the Arabic culture and really gotten a strong feel for that.
اللي يميز التجربة السياحية في إمارة أبو ظبي تنوع وجهات والمقاصد السياحية اللي فيها. اليوم الخدمات السياحية اللي تقدمها أبو ظبي خدمات عالمية راقية. التجربة اللي تميزها يعني يقارنها السائح بوجهات عالمية.
يعتبر ميناء خليفة هو البوابة الرئيسية لإمارة أبو ظبي للصادرات والواردات. اليوم الميناء يربط إمارة أبو ظبي بأكثر من 40 وجهة مينائية مباشرة من خلال أكثر من 17 خط ملاحي. هذا يساعد على تنشيط الحركة التجارية وبالتالي تنويع مصادر الدخل لإمارة أبو ظبي، ويصب في مصلحة تقليل الاعتماد على المصادر النفطية.
هذا المشروع الذي طال انتظاره في دولتنا الحبيبة لن يكون فقط مغيرا للخارطة على مستوى الدولة، ولكن سيغير خارطة النقل واللوجستية على مستوى المنطقة ككل. هذا المشروع سيكون معزز للأمن والسلامة في النقل وأيضا الاستدامة في دولتنا العزيزة.
And now it is with great honor that we present this year's FDI report sponsor, Abu Dhabi Global Market. Abu Dhabi Global Market is a world-class financial center for local, regional, and international institutions. It is focused on creating a sustainable business and financial ecosystem where local companies and international entities can grow together, furthering the growth of the financial services sector in the UAE as the country becomes an even greater hub for financial commerce. Now let's all watch a short video from Abu Dhabi Global Market.
Abu Dhabi has transformed itself into a thriving business hub. It has built a robust and sophisticated financial services sector with a large concentration of institutional and private wealth. It is within this context that Abu Dhabi's ambition for an international financial centre and the establishment of Abu Dhabi Global Market is a natural next step. ADGM encompasses 3 independent authorities, ensuring a well-regulated and business-friendly environment. The use of common law at ADGM will allow for direct connectivity with other global financial services centres. ADGM is focusing on Abu Dhabi's core strength areas to anchor the establishment of a world-class financial hub in the Emirate.
And now let us all please welcome His Excellency Ahmed Ali Al-Saiq, Chairman of Abu Dhabi Global Market, for his speech. Let's welcome him with a very big round of applause.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. To our international dignitaries and guests, I am honored to have this opportunity to sincerely welcome you to the UAE. Abu Dhabi Global Market, the International Financial Center of Abu Dhabi, is pleased to support the 7th Annual Investment Meeting and to witness the launch of AIM Startup at this conference. Looking around the room, you can say that the global investment ecosystem is very much represented today. World leaders, regulators, deal makers, intermediaries, asset managers, issuers, investors, and professionals. The theme of AIM 2017 couldn't have been more appropriate, considering the unexpected geopolitical and economic events of 2016. Interestingly, 2017 so far has been more stable, and markets have been performing well, and we expect a cyclical return and upturn in major economies this year. Notwithstanding short-term volatility and challenges, we are strategically centered in an extremely important region of developing and emerging economies, that is one of the growth engines of the world. Today, developing markets represent less than 20% of the global financial assets, but accounts for 40% of global GDP. By 2050, developing countries will represent 60% of the global GDP, with Asia and Africa being important growth areas. How do we each play our part to identify the opportunities and channel the resources, innovation, and investments to the economies that will continue to contribute to the real GDP growth worldwide? As a major economic center for the MENA region and an international trading nexus for the East and West, the UAE's success is underpinned by a number of integrating factors, from leadership, political stability, international financial regulatory regimes, leading innovations in infrastructure. Complementing this collected success is our commitment to help foreign investors and local sectors connect the dots between trade, investments, and development. Foreign direct investment has indeed been a great impetus and one of the key factors in fostering economic growth. In our journey to build a sustainable future, we are also pleased to achieve several first inventions in clean energy and in usage of solar power and in medical inventions. They are all proudly made in the UAE. Our leaders and government will continue to focus wholeheartedly on diversification, local talent, financial services, innovations, and entrepreneurship initiatives to achieve our long-term ambition for the country and a sustainable, better life for our people. In furthering this, ADGM was established by UAE federal law to support the long-term economic growth of the UAE. As an international financial center, ADGM's role is to provide and maintain a well-functioning, robust, and an international platform that unlocks business opportunities and attracts sustainable investments into our marketplace. We have put in place an open and internationally recognized ecosystem to assist local institutions to base their activities at home instead of abroad, and of course to enable international investments to come into the country. We enable regional institutions to support and conduct business activities and help international institutions to center their outreach strategy and interests in Abu Dhabi to serve the wider region and beyond. Since going live in October 2015, ADGM has played an important role in enhancing the local market's dynamics by introducing several new initiatives and adding to the attractiveness for activities to be anchored from Abu Dhabi to serve the MENA region and globally. We launched the first private REIT regime in the region and achieved one of the fastest pace of funds creation in our first year of operation with 8 registered funds. Our initiatives cut across many sectors. For example, in January this year, Etihad Airways and Natixis completed an aircraft leasing transaction for 2 Airbus A380s that are owned by special purpose vehicles that are now domiciled in ADGM. The aviation industry can continue to rely on ADGM's established platform to expand its global presence as Abu Dhabi aims to become the aviation financing and asset management hub for the region. By providing a comprehensive suite of funds and new innovative investment vehicles, local and global financial institutions can now conduct activities in the UAE, which had to be undertaken overseas in the past. And for UAE-based entities, it means doing business closer to home. To date, we have registered more than 320 diverse financial and non-financial companies, providing a wide range of business and financial services. Despite the volatile market conditions and wide trend of consolidation that is happening worldwide. However, this is just the beginning of the journey. We understand the necessity of preparing for the future by strengthening our core and embracing new changes. We stand on the brink of the fourth industry revolution, where the speed of breakthroughs has no historical precedent and challenging current business models, jobs in our markets, and the pace of economies. To tap on the potential of transformational technologies and fintech in our economy, we established the first fintech regulatory framework and live regulatory laboratory in November 2016. The first and so far only fintech reg lab in the MENA region. To support, enable, and accelerate fintech activities and developments in Abu Dhabi and our neighboring countries. ADGM is also the first jurisdiction in the MENA region that has established a fintech bridge with Singapore to facilitate our fintech players gain greater access to markets, capital, and regulatory recognition. We understand the value and benefits of developing an inclusive ecosystem to allow innovations to thrive and succeed. For our Reg Lab, we have received numerous applications from local and regional stakeholders, including applications from Singapore, US, and the UK. In October this year, ADGM, I'm pleased to announce, will be hosting its inaugural FinTech Abu Dhabi Summit, together with key Abu Dhabi institutions and global partners. As a global citizen, we will continue to work closely with local and international strategic stakeholders and partners under the stewardship of our leaders and our board to enhance the competitiveness and sustainability of our economy. We look forward to strengthening our partnerships with like-minded economies, and may this week be the beginning of new friendships and potential collaborations. I wish you a very rewarding and engaging meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency Ahmed Ali Al-Sayegh, for your speech. We definitely look forward to building new friendships and relationships throughout this year's AIM. Ladies and gentlemen, we now proceed to the Global Leaders Debate. Business leaders, senior public officials, and heads of international institutions and academia, representing some major stakeholders of the international investment community, will be invited to take part in this important session. The debate will be focused on international investment, path to competitiveness, and development, the theme for this year's annual investment meeting. This Limelight session will discuss and share views on the role of foreign direct investment in fostering competitiveness, growth, and development in countries in general and growing markets in particular. And now I would like to introduce the moderator and the panelists for the Global Leaders debate, and if I can ask them all to join me on stage once introduced. Our moderator is Mr. Karim Tanir, Managing Director and Head of Investment Banking, MENA region at JP Morgan Chase & Co. And our esteemed speakers are His Excellency Khalifa bin Salem Al Mansouri, Acting Under Secretary of the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development, Mr. John Danilovich, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Mish'al Hamid Kano, Chairman of the Kano Group, Mr. Mukisa Kutui, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, President Rustam Minikanouf, President of the Republic of Tatarstan, Professor Javier Salamartin, Professor of Economics and co-author of World Economic Forum's Competitiveness Report. Can I have a very big round of applause for our moderator and speakers?
Thank you for the delightful introduction, Rania, and Your Excellencies and the distinguished panel speakers. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I think we have a very exciting few days ahead of us, and no better than to start with the theme of today's, or this conference's topic, which is international investments and its impact on global competitiveness and development. So maybe we'll kickstart the session with a broad question that I would like to put to the panelists and take their views on that. So the question that I'd like to kickstart our proceedings with is, what main elements of competitiveness do you believe will play the largest role in attracting foreign direct investments into host countries? Would that be the legal framework? Would that be the skill sets that are present in that host country? Is it the infrastructure, education, probably quite a few others? Maybe we'll start with His Excellency the President with the answer. Thank you.
Ассаламу алейкум ва рахматуллахи ва баракату. Уважаемые дамы и господа, я буду говорить на русском языке. Привлечение прямых инвестиций – это задача любого государства, любого региона. Я буду исходить из своего видения, исходя из того, что происходит в нашей республике. Основные, конечно же, моменты, связанные с привлечением инвестиций, это соответствие законодательства данного региона и обеспечение безопасности и сохранности этих инвестиций. Второе, конечно же, геополитическая ситуация, расположение этой территории и очень важные вопросы касаются инфраструктурного обеспечения и обеспечения квалифицированной рабочей силой. Я считаю, что вот эти параметры очень важны в процессе привлечения прямых инвестиций.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'd like to turn to Your Excellency, Mr. Al Mansouri, and your views on that topic as well.
Thank you, Karim. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. صبحكم الله بالخير. Good morning, everyone. You talk about competitiveness and what attracts FDI to countries, to host countries. Historically, especially for developing countries, it was the abundant natural resources and cheap labor. I think going forward, future proper and suitable infrastructure is one of the key elements of attracting FDI. Also skilled labor, the platform to have the R&D for innovation and being at the forefront of especially we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, is one of the keys to attract FDI. Not to forget also the stable economic policies, security, being in a geographic position or being in a position to help FDIs expand their markets. I think those are some of the key attracting points to host countries for FDIs. That's generally the essence of.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Mr. Kanu. You have specific views on that, and specifically on the legal framework. How do you see that as indeed a path to competitiveness for foreign direct investors?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The most important thing, whether it's investing locally or investing internationally, comes down to the issue of trust. And trust is built in two ways. Trust is built over time, and trust is built over a structure that people can understand and can work with. The legal system is an important aspect of that trust. How do I structure the legal system so that the people can interact with it and use it without having to worry too much that it's going to change on me tomorrow? The other aspect, and in terms of investment, as a businessman, I would want to know who I'm working with. Because even if the structure allows me to come in as an independent and direct investor myself into a different country, let's even say in a developed country, economically developed country, I still would want to know who I'm working with. Because at the end of the day, if I don't have a bank that I can trust, yes, a legal structure I can trust, a partner I can trust, I'm not going to come in with my money. And as they say, money is a coward.
Yes, exactly. No, thank you for that. John, you've got a smile on your face, and you've done a lot of work in Latin America. And how would you describe the competitiveness in that part of the world, and more broadly perhaps, when they did attract foreign direct investments?
Thank you very much. With regards to foreign direct investment, I think there are two areas, one of which policymakers have control over, and one of which policymakers have no control over. With regards to the no control area, it's a matter of market size and potential. That is what a foreign direct investor sees. With regards to the area over which a policymaker does have control, it refers to a couple of points that have already been mentioned this morning. One is trust and predictability, transparency, and efficiency. The investment climate is critical for a foreign direct investor and for foreign direct investment. There must be a stable business environment with stable regulations and strong and consistent and predictable and transparent government support. If all of those elements are there for foreign direct investment, it can encourage investment and it can increase investment, and that is always to the benefit of both the investor and to the recipient. So those are the two major areas that I would look at.
No, thank you. I think it's a pretty consistent theme by the sounds of it on the panel. Maybe I would like to turn to Mr. Kitui and your views as well under the United Nations auspices.
Well, thank you very much. I think there is no single size that fits all. What the investor looks for in extractives is very different from what the investor looks for in service investment, for example. If you look at statistics from last year, the last 3-4 years, the largest FDI flows into Africa were into Democratic Republic of Congo and Mozambique, which have very weak institutions, which have very weak regime on investment policy, but because of abundance of natural resources. But if you look at the global picture, the largest drivers in investment today are in the services, particularly electronic commerce services, value added, and financial services. And there, the infrastructure of broadband inclusion, they're competitively priced, and of course, clear rules on liberalized capital markets, capital account, on ease of repatriation of profits are important drivers. But across the board, the most important consideration for a long-term environment of FDI investment is clarity of the political leadership in the host country. If countries are clear about where they're trying to go, the investor finds their interest consistent with what the country is trying to do. And that is sometimes reflected in clear bankable projects and clear understanding of what should be expected of the state vis-a-vis the investor.
Thank you. And maybe finally, we'd be interested to hear your perspective, Xavier, on that point.
Okay, I think it's very hard to put all the FDI in one basket. FDI has changed dramatically over the last 3 decades. We used to live in a world in which FDI was essentially seeking for natural resources and going from north to south. Today, there's many kinds of FDI that seeks to implement companies in local markets to get a market share. We have FDI that seeks for exports, seeks to get efficiency of a big of a part of a big value chain. And therefore, because FDI has changed dramatically, I'm afraid that academia doesn't really have strong views of what determines FDI, because many of these things are new. Again, it used to be north to south, now it's south to south, south to north. So we live in a new world, and therefore lessons we don't have very strong lessons. Now I work with a World Economic Forum, and we use data on tens of thousands of companies, surveys for companies, and we get heterogeneous answers as to what determines the decisions as when it comes to FDI. I don't think there is a very clear pattern. But I would say that there are two broad areas that one should work on. One is competitiveness. It's not that FDI creates competitiveness, it's that FDI goes to competitive countries, competitive in the way that we define at the World Economic Forum, and some of the lessons have been already mentioned: stable governments, clarity of rules, infrastructures, human capital, well-regulated. All of these things matter, and they matter for competitiveness of local companies as well as to attract FDI. So all of this is true, but there are specific things that matter for FDI, like for certain kinds of FDI. For example, FDI that tries to implement to get market share in a country, what matters to them is the ability to expand, right? The rules regarding creating new branches, the implications or the regulation regarding local content. Do you need local capital? Do you need to buy? Do you force companies to hire local people, local inputs, and obviously the ability to repatriate capital? All of these things are regulations that are specific for FDI, and of course, all of these things are going to matter. But again, what matters to different kinds of FDI is very different. As was already pointed out, FDI that goes to look for natural resources is very different from FDI that's seeking to implement to get market share, and therefore we shouldn't be really talking about all of them in the same.
Thank you, Javier. I mean, you've raised a lot of interesting points. Mr. Kano, do you have a comment there, I sense?
Yes, I've noticed everything that was mentioned on the panel is correct. I don't have any issues with it. But the one thing that seems to be not mentioned is the issue of tax. Because at the end of the day, even if I have the right structure, right organization, right, everything's right, but the tax rate is incredibly high, would I even consider investing in a country? You see different countries vying really hard to give you tax breaks or delaying tax, and I think this is, I'm very happy to say, in our part of the world, so far, with one small exception, so far it has been a tax haven, not to avoid taxes, but it's giving the investor an opportunity to take and make sure that his or her money that they've worked hard for comes back to their pockets, yes. Which I think is an important point.
No, we agree, I think, and during the session we're going to touch on tariffs and taxes and how one can optimize them. Maybe I'll just switch on to a slightly related question, and I'll put this to His Excellency President Minikhanov. Would you agree with the following statement, that it is not FDI that causes economic growth, but rather the host country's economic growth that attracts FDI?
Что касается привлечения прямых иностранных инвестиций, как это связано с ростом экономики, но я исхожу из нашей позиции, нашей республики. Я считаю, что это очень позитивный фактор, когда в территорию, в регион приходят иностранные инвестиции. Это говорит о том, что ты уже придерживаешься тех международных стандартов, и к тебе есть доверие. Во-вторых, ты создаешь комфортные условия, чтобы инвестиции шли к тебе. В-третьих, прямые иностранные инвестиции – это еще и новые технологии. Прямые иностранные инвестиции мы привлекаем в те направления, где мы имеем некий вакуум, или, то есть эти направления не очень развиты. Когда приходят прямые иностранные инвестиции, мы получаем возможность перенять вот тот менеджмент высокого уровня, те стандарты, которые есть. Я считаю, что прямые иностранные инвестиции, конечно, позитивно влияют на рост экономики.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Maybe I'll turn to Your Excellency, Mr. Mansouri, on that point.
I think the answer would be yes and no, maybe a combination of two.
Yes.
The economic prospects and growth of a host country can attract FDI. And at the same time, FDI can help and instigate economic growth in other cases. So I think it's the combination of two that makes it a success story, or it makes a country a target for foreign direct investment. I haven't seen any studies that shows a positive correlation of FDI over the economic condition of a country. I've seen both. I mean, positive and negative, so I cannot make the case.
Yeah.
So I'm saying both can lead to more FDI into a country.
Agree. I mean, as somebody put it, this is the question of is it the chicken or the egg? Indeed, sure. They are both interrelated. Xavier, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I agree. But again, different types of FDI. Obviously, if a country is perceived to be, having good growth prospects, it's going to attract a lot of companies that are going to want to share the market, and it's going to attract that kind of FDI. On the other hand, a country that has good economic conditions will attract, even if it's not growing, will attract FDI. And now the key here is that different kinds of FDI are going to have different kinds of spillovers or positive effects on other sectors, and therefore some kinds of FDI will indeed trigger the chicken, the reverse correlation. Some FDI will trigger economic growth, and some FDI will be responding to economic growth.
No, thank you for that. I'd just like to move on to a follow-on question, which is the type of investment that foreign direct investment can take shape of. And I want to focus on greenfield projects as opposed to acquisitions or direct investments. So, and that's a question to the panel. How do greenfield investment compare to other investments for an FDI host country, and are they more beneficial? I'd like to turn to Mr. Kitui on that to kickstart the debate.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, in our annual World Investment Report, which we publish every June, we have managed to demonstrate that greenfield investments have a greater contribution in, one, creation of sustainable employment, and two, enhancing an innovation and technical transfer environment than mergers and acquisitions. If you look at the stagnation of global FDI over the past, since the crisis of 2008, one of the hallmarks of slowing global FDI was that even as it declined, much of it was dominated by mergers and acquisitions, which are sometimes account transfer processes by multinationals shifting profits from areas of high taxation to areas of low taxation and pretending it's an investment. And sometimes it's consolidation or purchase of a competitor to cut down on the pressure for R&D. But if you look at greenfield investments, they have always and continue to be the main driver of value creation. And indeed, while M&A is something positive, we encourage that we measure a country's attractiveness by the growth of greenfield investments. And that's why there's so much hope now we're seeing in transition economies, particularly in Kazakhstan and Russia, and then in developing Asia, a return of higher quality greenfield investment as opposed to the mergers and acquisition of the past 5 years.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Mr. Mansouri, I'd like to turn to you because I see you're nodding in agreement with Mr. Kitui on that point.
Actually, I'm echoing, and I totally agree. I think greenfield investment have greater impact on economic growth than merger and acquisition. I've seen so many studies. He mentioned, actually, he covered the most of it, the sustainable employment, knowledge transfer, and having a long-term effect rather than merger and acquisition, which happens to be for different reasons. And I would say it's still positive, but greenfield has much more effect on economic growth in terms of as a direct investment, FDI.
Thank you. And Your Excellency, President Minikanov, do you concur with that view around greenfield projects being a bigger driver than M&A activities?
Я согласен с этой позицией, потому что мы последние 10 лет очень серьезно обращаем внимание на инвестиции в Greenfield. Вот в настоящее время мы имеем где-то 100 площадок в республике, где наша задача создать хорошие инфраструктурные возможности, дать хороший налоговый режим, обеспечить подготовкой кадров. И, конечно же, вот эти площадки мы выбираем в тех депрессивных территориях, где нужно создавать рабочие места. Я считаю, что это хороший задел на будущее.
Thank you. John, I'd like to turn to you and maybe shift the dialogue towards the multinational companies and the impact of their investments in a host country with regards to developing human capital, whether that's education, training, new standards of operations. What's your perspective on that? And secondly, do MNCs see that development as a burden, or is it really now a de facto must-have for you to really be able to operate as an FDI in a host country?
You know, this is a really interesting subject, the relationship between the multinational corporations, the MNCs, and local activities, because it is very much of a synergistic give and take relationship between all of them. Of course, the multinationals, perhaps initially in many cases, have a requirement and a necessity of training locals to have them learn the type of jobs, the efficiencies, capacities, capabilities that are necessary to perform the various functions that the MNCs have in mind. But shortly thereafter, there is a growth process which goes on amongst the people who have been trained in their acquisition of skills and proficiencies and their ability to contribute to the MNCs in and of their own right, and for them to start their own companies. their own companies, their own activities as an outgrowth, as perhaps a hub and spoke activity. We've seen that in many areas where there have been MNC development, where local industries have grown up alongside the MNC or as a result of the MNC to complement and in turn have created their own industry. So this sort of synergistic education sharing, knowledge sharing, competency sharing is something which is very important. Often it is initially from the MNCs themselves, but shortly thereafter, certainly in an interconnected world, local groups, local companies, local individuals are learning how to develop in their own right. And this is hugely important for the growth of a domestic economy.
So you do not see an MNC as a transitionary role. They start, they should continue, but at the onset, their role should be a lot more impactful with regard to these points.
You know, we've seen so much evolution in MNCs. MNCs themselves are changing entities as they develop around the world. They may start out as one thing. They may have started out as one thing 20, 30, 10 years ago, but they also evolve. And they also evolve because of the impact that locals have had on their evolution.
And I'll turn to Mr. Kani. What's your perspective on the behavioral aspect of MNCs towards a host country as an FDI?
We have to go a bit back into history to understand how this process begins. The process begins by the MNCs coming and setting up over here thinking, I really don't need anything to do with the local companies or the local economy. Gradually, by force, through the governments telling them, no, you have to understand that you have to take on part and parcel of the economy in terms of its natural capital from the human capital. But it's moved on, fortunately, to that most MNCs now understand that utilizing of growing, teaching, making the local cadre understand the importance of raising their game, raising their standard, creating new opportunities for them, not just for the MNC, but also for the national himself or herself to be able to go out and take their knowledge that they learned and bring it into the economy. Now, there's a fantastic benefit from this because our standards become higher and higher and become more world-class, and that's more important than anything else. It's not just opening up a company here or there. That's secondary. It might be important for the individual himself, but for the economy to grow up and create a better standard, these MNCs bring in world standards with them. And when they get over the idea that this is a tax burden, because initially that's the way they think of it, but they understand that these people can actually become a benefit for them, can become an ambassador for them, and can help create new waves to enter into different markets they would not be able to get before. They will have to raise the game of the people that they're training and educating. Once they get that, those people come back into the economy, they raise the game as well. So it's an overall win-win for everyone, as long as it's understood by all parties that everyone has to put in an effort. Yes, it's a burden, yes, it's a lot of pain, but eventually everyone benefits because as the economy starts to grow, as the standards start to become more global and more standard, a standard that everyone can understand and can work within, everyone benefits. But it's getting over that hurdle, that initial hurdle, because the first part of it is immediately hits your bottom line, yes. And most people or most companies don't like that.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. So an element of patience and long-term strategy is required on the part of the investor. Maybe I'll turn to you, Xavier, on that point. It is a win-win, but with patience, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's another chicken and egg problem here. The multinational corporations go to countries, as we said earlier, for a variety of reasons. One of them is the existence of the right kind of human capital. But of course, when they go there, they also affect human capital. And they affect the human capital directly through training, as it was mentioned, but also through certain kinds of externalities. Without realizing, they teach managerial skills to companies that might be, directly or indirectly related. But they also change the institutional environment. Let me give you one example. country that is dear to my heart for historical reasons is Spain. Spain used to have a very strange institution called siesta. People stopped working at 1 p.m., didn't know anything until 5 p.m., and then people started working at 9 in the morning, right, until 1, and then they relax, they go to sleep until 5, and then they start working again until 9, which was very, 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 very inefficient. That now has almost disappeared, and the reason is multinational corporations, right? When the Germans went to Spain, they say, what the hell is this siesta thing? No, you have to work in the middle of the day. So they transform the human capital through the changes in customs, in changing in the way they operate. So yes, there is two ways. Now, the empirical evidence on the effects of human capital, and in particular on wages and employment, is less clear. It is true that multinational corporations pay higher salaries, but it's not clear that they actually we don't know whether this is because they select better people, and therefore, on average, they pay higher salaries because they attracted better people. These people would have made better salaries in other places, and it's not clear what the net effect on employment is. Now, if you take a local plant owned by a local corporation, and that is bought by foreign capital, it is not clear that at the end employment is created on net.
Positive, yes, net impact. Positive impact,
the employment, net employment is positive. So the literature is, there are cases. Again, the literature has problems because the nature of the FDI is changing so fast that we don't have really data from the past, because the past was very different from today.
Yeah. So I'd like to turn to Mr. Kituya on that point, because indeed there is a debate whether there's a optimization that an MNC could bring into a host country that could have actually a negative spillover on the employment multiplier effect, while at the same time it could create new opportunities. From your perspective, how do you view that point and that balance between the two?
Okay, first of all, a clear difference between multinational corporations going into extractive investments. Limited skill multiplier effect, often limited backward and even forward linkage into the local economy. That's very different from services sector, whether financial or electronic commerce, where there is much greater expansion on employment creation through the investment and much more direct linkage with the particular backward linkage to the local economy. But having said that, there's also the character of what kind of engagement by the MNC. For example, 2/3 of global trade is driven by multinational corporations. Half of that is trade between units of the same MNC. And the character of that trade between units of the same group, because of optimizing efficiencies in the different sectors of the market, is very different from how the MNC behaves in an arm's length contract with enterprises in other countries. So these two facets determine the level of vertical integration and the level of spillover to the local economy.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Your Excellency, Mr. Mansouri, on that point, and then I'd like to take Mr. Kanu's views as well. So, as you're looking into FDI, into the UAE as a whole, do you have ways of measuring the positive impact of MNCs onto employment, knowledge sharing, and technical advancements?
There are several indicators that measures how FDI affects employment. But I would like to spin the first question about the MNC's role in human capital. I think the initial investment comes from governments trying to attract foreign direct investments. They invest in education. They invest in upskilling their laborers to attract more foreign direct investments. And that's where the circle continues, where MNCs come in and they train and enhance the pre-existing capabilities up to a level. There is a negative spillover where when it comes to technology and the transfer of technology, unskilled labor, unfortunately, need to find it more difficult to find jobs and so on. So going back to your questions of the measures, there are several measures we use on how FDI impacts economy as a whole, how FDI impacts employment, and in which sectors. Because I would think if a government or a country specifies certain sectors for foreign direct investments and gives incentives, we need to have the right measures to see how positive FDI can impact the economy and in those certain sectors. It differs from one country to another. For some countries, it is to create jobs. For other countries, it is to create sustainable knowledge-based economy, and so on.
Yeah, very clear. Thank you. Mr. Kanu?
It's harder for me to talk on a macro because this is a global issue, but on a micro, in terms of the Gulf, even just speaking within the Gulf, and I'll put Saudi Arabia on one side because the structure, the population structure is different than the rest of the Gulf. For the rest of the Gulf, the issue is for FDI, for the MNC, when they bring in FDI money into the region, the question of training, how much of an impact will they have? How much will an impact will they have on the local economy? Usually for the ones living, for the rest of the Gulf without Saudi Arabia, I would say the impact is more indirect rather than direct in terms of creating more services, more growth within services to companies that will service the MNCs and the investments that come into the country, because the population is so small. So it becomes very hard. Even if I was, let's say I came with a company that needed 10,000 people into a country like here, the UAE, I'd be absorbing a huge amount. If I just had 10,000 UAE nationals, I'd have a very hard time trying to find them. At the skill level I want, the skill set I want, and to train them up to the degree I want. It's not a reflection on any country per se, but it's 10,000 for a country like the UAE, whose population is a huge amount. But if I was picking up 100 or 200, that becomes an easier thing to handle. If I went to a place like Saudi Arabia, 10,000 might be a stretch, but it's not that much of a stretch. So I would say it would depend on the country you're talking about. In other parts where it's capital intensive, as in there are a lot of humans, like say if I was investing in India or Pakistan, it's the other way around. It'll be, it's easy to pick up human capital and to train them up to where I want. So the impact that I think that these things would have would be more of a around the area rather than direct. Yeah. I hope I'm getting the point across.
Yes, no, it's clear, and of course it is driven by the available resources in any host country, but also, as we've seen in the UAE, it has managed to attract significant amount of expatriate living within the country across all the skill sets. So that actually has come through an MNC investment. So it's been a two-pronged success for the UAE, alongside attracting new expatriates and then training the locals, as you correctly identified, and trying to find them to work on that combination.
There is actually a very positive thing from that, because the question is whether we're focusing on quantity or quality.
Yes, true.
And I would rather focus on quality rather than quantity. Yeah. And the more, as I said, the more we move towards a global standard. The reason why, by the way, we have the Abu Dhabi global market, the reason why we have the DIFC, the reason why we have these focusing on international standards in the financial sector. Just, if you allow me this, just 2 seconds on this one. The reason why we're trying to focus on these things is because, again, we're looking for quality over quantity. Once you have the quality, people will come to you. I do not need to have a large place. I need to have a place where people understand and say, yes, this is a place I want to settle my money. And as I said at the beginning, money is a coward. Yeah. So I'm looking at places where I'm comfortable, and where I can prosper. And that means I need to have quality people. This is why I think the government here in the UAE has done a superb job in doing this. And I'm not here just to promote the government of the UAE, but let's face it, if it's done a fantastic job, it needs to be recognized. Yeah. And the government of the UAE has done it, both on a federal level and also on the state of Dubai, state of Abu Dhabi. To create this amount of opportunities, to bring in quality companies, to help increase and benefit the local population, either directly through training and to upgrade, or indirectly by creating a better economy, a greater economy, a more efficient economy. This is exactly what we're looking for FDI.
No, thank you for that comprehensive answer. I'd like to turn to His Excellency President Minikanov and maybe shift the debate on the sectors where FDI usually flows. We've seen in emerging markets, perhaps in the Middle East region, in Africa and in Central Asia, a lot of focus on FDI with regards to exploiting natural resources, hydrocarbon, and the mining sectors. How do we need to incentivize now FDI into parallel and, more important, new generation sectors such as e-commerce and infrastructure?
Что касается привлечения в новые сектора, я могу сказать, что есть такой большой проект в нашей республике. Это создание крупного IT-центра. Он называется Иннополис. Там уже работает и особая экономическая зона, работает и университет. Конечно же, самое главное для привлечения инвесторов в эти направления, конечно, надо готовить в первую очередь инфраструктуру и подготовка персонала. Очень важны вот эти обучающие центры, ресурсные центры, университеты. И вот предыдущий вопрос, как ТНК влияют и как эти вопросы решаются на местах, я на примере нашей республики могу сказать, что мы с ними подписываем соглашение. Мы должны понимать, какой персонал и сколько их нужно. И для этой задачи мы вовлекаем наши высшие учебные заведения. Но самый главный вопрос не специалистов высшей квалификации, а о рабочих профессиях. Поэтому стандарт ТНК очень высокий. Исходя из этого, мы уже вот создали 20 таких ресурсных центров, и в ближайшее время мы еще 10 таких создадим. Но эта работа идет вместе с ними, потому что государство берет на себя расходы по содержанию, по переоснащению, но основные компетенции, которые нужны для них, они привносят сами. Поэтому у нас, конечно же, инвестиции привлекаются в основном в обрабатывающие секторы, но мы сегодня очень активно работаем в рамках IT, в рамках новых материалов, в рамках робототехники. Но это связано обязательно, конечно же, с высококвалифицированным персоналом.
Thank you. John, I'd like to turn to you, given again your experience in emerging markets, and particularly in countries that were driven predominantly by mining and the oil sector. So have you seen and do you witness this movement away from these traditional markets into new markets?
I think very much so. With the weakness in commodity prices, we see a definite shift away from those traditional industries towards e-commerce and towards infrastructure. In fact, the World Bank says that there's tremendous potential growth for trade and services. The internet has changed the very fabric of the whole world economy, in fact. Over 90% of SMEs that export on eBay have seen tremendous exponential growth in their markets. And this is a vast market, not only in the developed world, but more potentially in the developing world. So e-commerce is, in a way, very much, we see this in all the big name companies that you're all aware of, whether they be Chinese or other companies, certainly in China and in the United States. These companies have grown tremendously over the last decade, and quarter by quarter also show tremendous growth even now. So I think this is something where all of us need to focus our attention.
Great. Yes, Mr. Kitui.
Yes, if I may just share some specific statistics from World Investment Report 2016. There has been a very dramatic decline in FDI into primary sectors. In Asia and Oceania, it's down at 2.1% of all FDI is into the extractives and primary resources. Latin America and the Caribbean, 22%. The largest is Africa, 28.1%. But a whole 70% of FDI into developing Asia is into services. 50% in Africa. Now, the character of these investments, of course, becomes dramatically dependent on the particular sectors you're going into. With the growing importance of e-commerce, the digital infrastructure, clear, competitively priced, fixed broadband, for example, and proper, predictable financial market system are the major drivers of who goes in addition to the skill sets. Now, it may be true that the investor in MNC is looking to bring in certain skills, but it helps a lot if a country has the core human resource development levels that just need limited tweaking to get to the kind of skill set that is required. So when you have the ecosystems like in Bangalore, you have already the basis on which you attract others. You're competitive in multiplicity of languages and geographical location. If you're doing back office operations, where you are on delivering audit services when others go to sleep is critically important. So all the ecosystem has all these different components and affecting differently the different countries.
That's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. Your Excellency, Mr. Mansouri, are you seeing the same theme developing in the UAE as well?
I think the UAE is no different than the other parts of the world. We've seen sort of shift on even in our target sectors. If you look at the UAE, I'll try to comment on Abu Dhabi, for example. Abu Dhabi has set one of its goals is to diversify away from oil and to open other sectors. Cultural tourism, for example, is one of the sectors. Healthcare, putting the right infrastructure like seaports and airports, highways. In a way, this is to attract FDI into other sectors. Abu Dhabi is on the leading edge when it comes to renewable energy, for example. Also in innovation. Last week we had the first Global Industrialization and Manufacturing Summit. This is to look at where the future is and where investment should be, and to create the platform, I think, for foreign direct investment to come and invest and establish excellence center and research centers in Abu Dhabi to serve not just the region, but the globe also. This is in general, a brief look at what Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi is no different than the others.
Thank you. Mr. Kano, what's your view on that movement, into new industries and new technologies?
Anything that benefits humankind is always a positive thing to look at. But on the issue of investing and opening up our markets, there are different things to consider. From one aspect, yes, the correct thing is, yes, I am interested in ensuring that there is growth in my economy, growth in the wealth and the benefit of the people on the ground. But I also have to wonder, to what degree, what type of tax will I have to pay to allow these companies into my market? One of the taxes that becomes an issue as a businessman, and I'm telling you this because this would affect me, is if I open up my markets too much to the FDIs, do I actually kill my current local businesses? Because there will be the 800-pound gorilla coming into my market. Can I defend myself? Yes, I want to upgrade myself to the point that I can defend myself, but not to the point that I'm now open and somebody can come in and easily overtake me. So there has to be a balance in terms of what I allow into my economy and what I don't. And by the way, if people think this is protectionism, and there has to be some sort of protectionism, and protectionism exists all over the world. So if anyone says this doesn't exist, even in the most open economies, you have protectionism. There are strategic sectors that every country will be defending itself with, from outside companies coming in. And again, the United States which is the bastion of open economy, open trade, but even they have certain sectors which are blocked or are, it's very hard to enter. So there has to be a balance. Yes, on the one hand, I do want the monies to come in, but on the other hand, I want to make sure I give enough growth space for my local companies to be able to breathe.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Xavier, I think you wanted to interject there.
Yes, this is an excellent point that brings the question of interest groups and lobbies. Many times, very often, most often, these protectionist tendencies have nothing to do with the well-being of the country or the well-being of the citizens. They have to do with interest groups, right? Creative destruction means that every time there is a new idea, the people that live off the old idea will lose money. And of course, because they lived off the old idea, they tend to be rich and powerful, and they will use anything at their disposal to prevent the new ideas from coming. And therefore, it is a tricky thing because you know, we see this today in many countries, including supposedly free countries with Uber, right? Yes. The reason why Uber is not being implemented in many countries is not that it's a bad idea. It's that the taxi lobby is very powerful in some countries. This is the old ludist movement all over again. And countries have problems when the ludists lose. I want to make another point that it has not been discussed, and it has to do with migration and migration rules, which is now a hot topic in the United States. One of my favorite sentences by Bill Gates was when he was asked whether he thought China would eventually overtake the United States. And he says no. The reason is that growth is essentially, at the end of the day, the engine of growth is ideas, technology, ideas. And ideas come from people. And then the reporter said, well, China has more people than the United States, and therefore eventually they will have more ideas and they will overtake. And he says wrong. He says China has 1.3 billion brains. That's true. But the United States has 7 billion brains. The population of the United States is not 7 billion. 7 billion is the population of the world. But he said, but the United States is open to every brain in the world. Everybody is welcome here, and that is our strength. Okay? People were discussing earlier the lack of human capital in certain countries, the strength of countries, and I think Bill Gates made this statement before Trump.
Yes.
Yes. But it's a very important statement, right?
No,
if you rely on the brain capacity of humanity rather than the brain capacity of your own country, you are in much better shape.
No, I'm glad you brought up that point, because this is some of the challenges we wanted to really also address. There's a lot of positives around, obviously, FDI, but we have seen this sense of rising of protectorism. And yes, as the panelists have mentioned, it is out there, and in the case of the current administration in the United States, it's becoming a little bit more vocal about it as well. Does the panel feel that this new trend of immigration, of protectionism, of self-inward trade going to last for longer? Maybe I'll turn to John to take that first question, and then I'll run with the rest of the panel.
I hope you're not asking me because I have an American accent.
Not at all. This is an equal question to all the panel.
I'm glad to hear it. I think you used a very interesting adjective in your preamble, which was the current administration of the United States. It is not the permanent administration of the United States, and neither is it consistent with all previous presidents of the United States with regards to immigration, and primarily also in most instances with regards to protectionism. So whatever the current rhetoric, perhaps not reality, but current rhetoric may be with regards to protectionism, and you've already seen this administration confronting the reality of world trade, of supply chain, of multilateral agreements, which they seemed not to be aware of during the campaign. But now that they are confronting the reality of world trade and how world trade is actually created and has been structured for the last many decades, their ability to deal with this is far different than the rhetoric of the campaign. And so may it also be in the longer term with regards to migration. I think it's a very interesting and very clever comment that was made by Javier with regards to Bill Gates' comment of 1.3 million brains as opposed to 7 billion.
Yep.
The United States of America has always been based on migration. It is a nation entirely of immigrants, of course, except for the Native Americans, but for 250 years, it has been a country that has been survived on wave after wave after wave of immigrants, each of whom have brought their new ideas and new creativity and new dynamism. So I think,
John, sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just being told that we need to pause our session for now. So I'd like to turn it over to Rania.
Thank you. Can I have a big round of applause to all our speakers?